Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Skip Allen, and once again, I'm here with Mark Tortai, and we're going to be discussing All Quiet on the Western Front. This is another essential movie and one of the 52 must-see movies from the book right here. The 52 must-see movies from Robert Osborne from Turner Classic Movies. This book is full of all of the films that myself and Mark and Billy and Andrew and Stephen are all going to discuss in this series of videos. So just so you know that we're not just doing this because we love movies. We're doing this for a reason. This is a passion project for Robert Osborne, and we want to continue doing it because we love films just like Robert Osborne did. So this is the kind of the text that we're going on, and we're just going through these movies and watching them. And now we're going to discuss one of the films, All Quiet on the Western Front. Now, this film is a black and white film that won the Oscar for Best Picture back in the 1929-1930 year. So this is a movie that came out quite a long time ago, but it stands the test of time because it has a subject matter that is very relevant to today in any era. Because the thing about this film is it was like a film that discouraged war. It was a movie that was based on a text, a subtext about a book about trying to tell people how bad war is. And once you watch the film and read the book, you'll understand how violent war is and how depressing war is and how it can play a lot of different kinds of games on soldiers and the mind games and the things that are going on. So once again, for this episode, I have Mr. Mark Tortai. How you doing, Mark?
Doing good. Yeah, thank you for having me on. All Quiet on the Western Front is certainly one of my favorite war films. It's old, of course, and so some of it is a little bit slow, but it's also really, really powerful and really a very thought-provoking film as well, with a ton of history, because it was once a book. And I guess we can go into that later, what happened to that book in certain places in the world at certain times. But yeah, it's one of my favorites, so I'm definitely honored and ready to talk to you, Dave. Excuse me, Dan. I call you Dave every once in a while. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I have a twin brother named Dave. You didn't know that, did you?
I didn't.
All right, so we got Lou Ayres, and he plays Paul. And then we got Louis Wolheim, who plays Kat. And we have Slim Somerville, who plays Jaden. And this is a film by Louis Milestone. And it is the very first picture from Universal Pictures to win the Oscar, which is, thinking about all the movies Universal Pictures has made, this is the very first one that ever won the Oscars. And Universal Pictures has been making movies for a long time. I mean, upwards of 80-something years, maybe you're getting close to 100 years of pictures from Universal Pictures. That's a long time. They made so many great ones. So let's get into discuss the director and some of these actors. I know let's just say that Louis Ayres he was 22 years old when he was cast as the star of All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah, gosh, Louis Milestone is a great director, first of all. He was born gosh, in 1895 in Russia. Um, Today it's the country of Moldova, and he had Jewish heritage and moved to America. I guess sometime just before the First World War, and he made a lot of really great films, not just All Quiet on the Western Front, but he's also well known for directing the original 1939 of Mice and Men, which is a really, really great movie, as well as A Walk in the Sun from 45. He did Les Miserables in 52. And then he ended up doing two other movies, actually a couple other movies that are really interesting. One is sticking with the war film. He rarely did war movies, but he did one in 1950 that I absolutely love called Pork Chop Hill, which is extremely underrated with Gregory Peck, which also launched the career of Martin Landau and a whole bunch of young people. John Saxon was in it. Harry Guardino was in it. Rip Taylor was in it. So many young actors. Then he also did the original Ocean's 11, and then he did Mutiny on the Bounty. So some amazing classic films he directed. And he was just a really terrific filmmaker. Certainly one of my sort of personal favorites from the classic era. This film is also, by the way, in the Library of Congress in the film registry. And as we get more into the story and some of the themes, it'll be apparent why. As far as cast is concerned, they're all playing Germans, and of course, I don't think anybody was German. I think there was mostly an American cast, which is still quite interesting, quite good. I know that it says I'm sort of looking up a little bit of information. Lou Ayres, who played the main character, he did win he was nominated for an Academy Award in the 40s. So, yeah, I mean, just a cast that is not necessarily like super famous, unfortunately, but I think that they were well remembered in their own ways, in their own regard. But I do think Lewis Milestone is probably the star of this film in a sense, and certainly his career and his legacy kept going for many decades after he made this movie.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also on this film is, as a producer, not a director, and somebody that had a hand in Lou Ayres' career in later years, is George Cukor. So George Cukor is a producer in this film, and he was a big player in Hollywood for many years, and so him and Lou Ayres actually had a few films together after that. Dark Mirror, Johnny Belinda, and so forth. Now, real quick on Lou Ayres, he was a medic, and because he was a conscientious objector, he was actually in World War One, and when he got out, he got into acting. But he was a conscientious objector. So being in this film really meant a lot to him because of what the film was all about. And you mentioned all these guys were American actors and they were playing all Germans. So you're hearing these names that they're being called and the kind of some of the stuff that's going on. And okay, this is an interesting aspect of how to tell a war film from the German side of point of view, but they're all Americans. And of course, we get to the beginning of the film, which is really interesting because you have this teacher, and he's a German teacher, and he's like trying to get his students to go into World War One for the fatherland, and the fatherland is Germany. So talk about how if you were a young eye and you see all these young wide-eyed kids and they're like, oh, I'm going to fight for my country and so forth. And of course, as the film goes on, that changes.
Yes, that opening scene is very reminiscent and has been borrowed in a lot of other war films and also books. And I just have two troopers. The book, not as much, but the movie, where teachers are encouraging their men to go off to fight this war, specifically the character of Michael Ironside, who ends up being the commanding officer of his students, essentially. So he's a teacher, and then they go off to war, and then he's an officer. And also, oh gosh, what was the second one? Not Full Metal Jacket. That was another one. Anyway, Born on the 4th of July, which has a scene where Tom Cruise's character, Ronnie Kovic, is actually in a high school auditorium, and then a Marine comes in and essentially recruits them. So we see this in so many different films afterwards. It's some teacher, some authority figure does the recruiting for a young student, and certainly they're being fed what you could call propaganda. The older, teacher that's been around probably since, he's probably in his at least 50s or 60s. So he had been around when Germany wasn't an empire. Then obviously when Germany was an empire in 1871, which is very interesting because when the Second Empire, the German Empire, is the empire that fought and lost World War I. And so being of the older generation, he wanted to see that Germany succeed past the war. And that was certainly a lot of the rhetoric and nationalism that a lot of people in Germany had at the time, that they had to protect this Second Empire because they didn't want it to be dissolved, which of course it did after 1918. And yes, when you say they actually get to the front, and it's definitely a lot different from what they expect. I think that war is something patriotic, it's something noble, and they find it to be very dirty, very dehumanizing, very emotional, and also very pointless. And I think that that's kind of really brilliant, because it is what a lot of soldiers experience. And it is something that is also weaved into war movies. Like my favorite war movie and my favorite movie of all time is Platoon. And they deal with some of those things, like how the war is just not the same of what they were sold, by a recruiter or by, whatever else. And this was the first to do that. This is the first war film that was really anti-war, and just the amount of influence that film still has today on war movies and movies that deal with the military and combat is really, really quite remarkable. So again, for being one of honestly the most seminal war films like ever made, All Quiet on the Western Front is just brilliant. And it is brilliant from beginning to end, specifically this. And to go back, specifically the scene when, they're being sold something by their teacher that doesn't turn out to be true in the end. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're going to get into some of those things that the teacher doesn't really let him in on. It's, like you said, dirty. But words that I want to use are, because it is war, bloody, violent. It seems like it's endless. What they're going against is endless. And then you add all that up, it starts to play games on them. Like, what are we going to do? We're in these trenches. We're in these little bunkers. This is never going to end. How are we going to get out of this? We're not going to. They're starting to figure out, even though they meet Kat and Tejan and some of these other guys. Well, real quick before I get into all that is, they get the basic training and they know their drill instructor. They know who it is. It's Himmeltoss. It's Himmeltoss, played by John Ray. Himmeltoss, they know the guy, but he can't let on that he knows these guys. And so he's like, oh, you guys get in line. He puts them through their paces because he's got to get these guys ready for war. So they're doing some of the most ungodly things just to prepare for war, crawling through mud, not sleeping, not eating, doing all this stuff, just so Himmeltoss can get them prepared for what they're going to face against um, the Americans and all these other countries. I know Australia was one of the countries in World War One that fought. England, obviously, and they're trying to go after France. They're fighting a lot. A lot of this fighting is in France. So then we go into they're there, and exactly what Himmeltoss is trying to prepare them for, they are getting. And so just talk about some of the conditions, the mental fatigue, the blood, the violence, some of all that stuff that's thrown in these guys' face. And war, which is what war is. I mean, I'm not, obviously we know what war is.
Sure. I mean, that's again very seminal. That scene, the training scene of, like, you know, Full Metal Jacket and all these great movies. Yeah, I mean, World War One was particularly a dirty war because of the trenches, and of course, trench warfare. They dug, you know, 3 feet deep or something. They had quite an elaborate set of trenches, and when it would rain, it would just be mud because that's what the trenches were made out of. And of course, it gave birth to a condition, a medical condition that, like, people had never heard of before, called trench foot, which just essentially means that your feet are wet and moist from usually rain and puddle water for an extended period of time, and your foot begins to rot. You know, skin begins to break. Your nerves, your nerve endings, you can't feel. You know, you can't feel. You get cut off circulation. This had never really happened in human history. I mean, I'm sure there would have been scattered cases, you know, theoretically, but nothing in the grand scheme of this large, massive, you know, epidemic of this trench foot. The other thing too is I do know one. I don't know how well it touches on, how much it touches on, but the artillery fire from the other side and all the explosions, because that's all they were doing before a battle was they would hit a barrage of artillery. They would stop. Soldiers would come back and forth for months and months and months. Now, this artillery fire was dangerous for two reasons. Well, the most obvious reason being it's a shell that explodes and it could kill a lot of people, but for two other reasons, which was there were certain artillery shells that made certain sounds in the air. They would be able to tell, like, which artillery shell it was just by hearing the sound, and that played with soldiers' psychology because, of course, they never knew when it would actually hit or where it would hit. So they would hear these sounds and they would get really freaked out. And then once it started exploding, if you're near live active explosives, even though you're not getting hit physically, but just the sound and just the ringing of the artillery shell actually damages you psychologically, and we get the first shell shock, which essentially now is called post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that every soldier has always dealt with since the beginning of modern, or all warfare, modern and ancient. It's just, of course, now we've developed more psychological techniques. So that's really what is introduced in these scenes. It's the physical conditions, it's the psychological conditions, and it's also like these soldiers just sort of trying to deal with the disillusionment of being led to this war that is really, really kind of, in their eyes, like sort of pointless in one sense, and they're really struggling to deal with all those issues. And again, this is why people should watch this film, because you have to understand it's really one of the first war movies that literally introduces all of those seminal things that I just mentioned. And it's really, really important to watch this film, and it's really important to understand those issues, because this was all before the Second World War as well. This is all just the first. So it's in hindsight, it's very, very sad to think of what would then come in another 10 years, 15 years. So yeah.
And then of course we add the hunger to it, and that really accentuates everything that they're going through. And Kat, one of the vets, he kind of is like he's got a nose for food, and he's able to run around and get food. He got him a pig one time, but pretty much these guys are hungry all the time. And so you're dealing with these conditions, and you're dealing with the bombs, and you're dealing with the artillery, and that really starts to play tricks on you. And then you start seeing all your guys one by one by one by one get killed or taken away with a leg off, an arm off, whatever. And then you start seeing your numbers start to diminish, and you're like one of the few guys left, and then you finally get hurt and they send you home. And so you're dealing with all of this stuff back in France and in the war, starving and all these different things that are going on. Then you get to go home, and it's not like home was before. What is that really? What kind of effect does that have on Paul?
Yeah, it has, again, and this is another reason why people need to watch this movie, because it was, again, one of the very first times that we saw that sort of PTSD-ness of when he returns home, because when people obviously experience that amount of trauma and that amount of sort of psychological trauma, they can't connect with the things that they used to enjoy. So his whole life, obviously he wanted to get out of the trenches, so he does, but he cannot connect to the people that are at home, and he cannot connect with his old life. It's not the same. He's changed so dramatically, and he's so different. And that's certainly, again, something that we see later on, like Born on the 4th of July and all these fantastic movies. This is where it starts. And obviously his life has changed, as so many soldiers have changed. And there's a lot of that disillusionment, and there's a lot of that psychological pain, and he's just kind of unable to move on with his life and get on, because there's a lot of memories and there's a lot of trauma. And again, it's so brilliant that this film was like one of the first to ever deal with these things. It's really remarkable, actually.
Then, real quick, we'll touch on, we go back to the teacher. He comes back to the class, and the teacher's got a whole new bunch of kids in there. And he's like, oh, here's Paul. He'll talk to you about blah, blah, blah. And he has a mental breakdown. Real quick, talk about that whole scenario when he goes and sees a bunch of kids, because he knew he was one of those kids. He was one of those kids at one time. And then he just like, I got to go back. I got to go back.
Yeah. That's the whole sort of second generation, where he's gone through all this stuff. He's back at the school. He sees the teacher who he essentially, I guess you could say, essentially misled him. But he goes back, he sees him, and yeah, you're absolutely right. There's those new kids, and of course he's looking. He's there to tell the kids to go off to war, first of all, which is a circle. But then at the same time, he knows that, if he does, obviously the war's not going to be, it's going to be hard for those kids. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. He's got this major, major conflict on what to do. And again, it's so brilliant. I'm going to say the same thing again, because this is literally the first time that happens. And we see it in so many war movies past this movie. And it's just really kind of amazing now that I'm thinking about all these little things that you're mentioning, as I'm recalling the film again, and just honestly how seminal and how iconic these issues that they deal with in every single scene of the film have been mimicked and mirrored, for better for worse, in probably hundreds of war movies since. So yeah, I mean, that's the conflict. Like, what does he do, right? Does he say to those kids, don't go, like, this is terrible, like, you shouldn't do this, like, which is probably what he wants to? But then he's also German, and Germans are very patriotic, and so maybe these kids should go and fight. Like, it's it's incredible, you know.
Yeah, and real quick, he's also dealing with, the illness. His mother is pretty much about to die, so he's dealing with that. She's very ill, and then he decides, instead of going back in 4 days, he's going to go back, and he goes back, and like I mentioned before, almost everybody, a group of men that was 150 men, are down to something like 22 in the mid 20s or 30s or something like, and he's only got like one guy that he knew, and that's Tejan. Tejan, played by Slim Somerville. He's pretty funny. Slim Somerville's kind of cool in the film, and so is Louis Wolheim, who's Cat. And he says, "Hey, where's Cat?" He says, "Oh, Cat's out looking for food." So he goes and gets Cat, and Cat gets nicked while he's out looking for food. He has to carry him back, and he brings him back, and Cat, he thinks he's just, he's got nicked on the ankle. He's okay. Well, he didn't realize it was a bomb maybe 5-10 feet away while he was bringing him back, and I think debris caught him and got him in the throat and killed Cat while he's carrying Cat on his shoulder. And then, of course, we're back out at the war. He's back out after having been not out on the front lines for a while, and he sees a butterfly. He's like, unbelievable, there's a butterfly out here. And he's like, wow, this beautiful creature is out here in this absolute abysmal wasteland that we're here. And he reaches out to get the butterfly. He's inches away from the butterfly. And ironically enough, the man that he kind of spent a night in a trench with, when he years ago or months ago, he spent the night in a trench with a Frenchman. I think it was a Frenchman, one of the Allies.
Yeah, he was a French soldier, and he goes through his personal belongings and sees photos and stuff too.
We don't know that Paul sees them because he's reaching for the butterfly, but the very same guy that he kind of nursed back to health in a lot of ways that he spent in that trench ends up being the guy that shoots him in the head to end the film. I mean, that scene is an amazing, powerful scene. The butterfly that's just so peaceful and quiet and beautiful, and then all of a sudden, boom, dead.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the most very bleak, but it also makes the point, of course, that the war is going to just go on like it doesn't really matter. It's just, that's it. And one of the statements that they're making is specifically with the whole trench, when he gets caught into the trench and they're going to kill each other with the French soldier, and then he sort of finds that, I think he finds photos or something. I've sort of forgotten, but they sort of realize that they're, kind of the same, like that they're both just soldiers. They just happen to be born in two different countries that happen to be governments or happen to be fighting the war, and they're probably pretty similar to each other if they weren't at war. And that's something that World War I specifically really started to unfold, because soldiers actually spent a lot more time in different parts. Like before World War I, it was what they would call gentlemen's wars, where people would just, like the American Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, there'd just be rows of men on one side, a row of men on the other. They just shoot people and then they fall down. And you rarely of course, obviously with Gettysburg and some of these battles, people, cross lines. Obviously, they had hand-to-hand combat, but it was somewhat rare, I think. Whereas in the trenches, there's so much more of it, fighting one-on-one, hand-to-hand, because of how technology had advanced at that time. And so it would be very common for people to and yeah, and then the very end again, him getting killed, is just a statement of like, this is just going to happen as long as there's war. These innocent kids, you can try to find meaning or beauty in this, but it's still war. Like in the end, he actually kind of made a mistake, which is that he gave his position away. He you should do that basically, but he was so enthralled by this butterfly. And I do want to say, and again, going back to movies that are inspired by All Quiet on the Western Front, there is that ending where he's reaching for the butterfly is kind of similar to a small scene in The Thin Red Line when a soldier is sort of down in a valley and he's touching leaves because they're just kind of bored and things like that. He's not killed that soldier, but yeah, it's a remarkable sort of seminal film. So it really tells statements again of humanity and war and people in war and what soldiers, who they really are. And yeah, it's just another brilliant scene.
Yeah, and so obviously, needless to say, all the things that you mentioned, Mark, about movies today, movies 10 years ago, movies 20 years ago, movies 30 years ago, that have been influenced by All Quiet on the Western Front, have showed us why this film is such an essential film for film goers of all ages, all walks of life, all creeds, all colors. If you have, you want to learn about war, if you don't like war, you like war. I think this is a film that all people should see because of the message. Yes, the message is war is bad. You shouldn't get into wars. But I think people of all ages, all walks of life, everybody should watch it and make up their own mind about war. And my opinion is I don't like war, but I know, I have a relative that's in the Coast Guard, who protects this country. And obviously you need a military. Because people are just going to take over wherever they feel. And Adolf Hitler and some of these different countries going back hundreds of years just say, you know what? I want to take over Greece. I want to take over this one. I want to take over that one. And they just walk over in their boats or their wherever and start taking it. So you got to have a military, and you got to have wars. It unnecessarily a means to, you have to have wars. Is something that is going to have to happen, whether you like it or not. And that's why this film is such an essential film. And you got any last comments?
Yeah, it was based on a book, and the book itself, because it has such anti-war themes, especially questioning the German war effort. It was banned in Nazi Germany, so that's how you know it's powerful. Because if people want to ban or burn a book, it means it has a very important and powerful message. And in this case, of course, any kind of fascist or National Socialist regime is based on going to war with other people who are weaker and exploiting them and exploiting their resources. And of course, this tells a massive cautionary tale, an emotional cautionary tale of why you shouldn't get into war, because there's a lot of other things that go on. So again, the book is fantastic. I read it in high school. The movie is great. There was also a TV film in the late 70s with Ernest Borgnine and Donald Pleasance, which is really good too. So there's a lot of really, again, a great legacy that this book has created. And I would just say, please seek it out if you're watching this, and either read the book or watch the movie or the TV film. They're all fantastic.
All right. So for Mark, where can you be found?
Please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Mark Tordai, MarkTordai. And I just started a YouTube channel with my friend Gordon. We do YouTube videos, reviews on movies and films, TV shows, and a whole bunch of stuff, which you can find on YouTube, or just go onto my Twitter feed or my Instagram feed, and we post links to our videos from there. So thank you again, Dan. Really appreciate it. And as you can see, I definitely love this movie. So I had a great time talking with you. Thank you.
Yeah, on the 52 must-see movies and why they matter, I have people that are all over the country and other countries, and we all have one thing in common. We're like Robert Osborne. We love movies. We want to discuss these movies, and we're not. We're all different ages. Mark's a different age than me. I'm a different age than Steven and Andrew and so forth. So and Billy. So we're all different generations, and there's one thing that binds us all together, and we all love movies, just like the people that came up with these 52 movies. They're all different generations, different walks of life, and so forth. So that's why we're doing this in honor of Robert Osborne and Carrie Fisher and people that came up with these 52 films. So for Mark, myself, we will see you next time. You can catch up with other episodes of the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. We've done Casablanca, North by Northwest, Rear Window, City Lights, and It Happened One Night. So there's a few episodes. Once you watch this episode, you can go back and watch some of those episodes. You can find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, or at From the Fourth Row. I also do a podcast with my co-host Vinny Laspada called The Best Damn Movie Show, which you can find this and the other episodes of this show, the 52 must-see movies and why they matter, on the Best Damn Movie Show YouTube channel. And I also do another little show called The Top 5 Weekly, where myself and other people, Mark has been on a few episodes of that, we'll just discuss a category each week. So go on the Best Damn Movie Show, and you can find all those episodes and the rest of the episodes of these 52 must-see movies and why they matter. So for Mark and myself, good night.